Hi, Clutter Fairy fans. This is the Clutter Fairy Weekly for March 4th, 2025. I'm your co-host, Ed Gumnick, and I'm speaking with Gayle Goddard, certified professional organizer and owner of the Clutter Fairy in Houston, Texas.
Hi, everybody. The Clutter Fairy Weekly is the webcast and podcast that digs deep into the clutter that piles up between you and the life that you want to be living. We explore the habits and behaviors that lead to clutter, and we suggest strategies to slow the accumulation, reduce the collection, and comfortably manage the stuff we decide to keep.
If you're new to our Zoom meeting, we want to let you know that you can share your comments and questions via the chat feature, and I'll try to make sure Gayle addresses them before we move on to another topic. You can also use the raise hand feature if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment yourself via audio or video. And we're streaming the webcast live on Facebook, so you can share your questions and comments there, and I'll relay them to Gayle. We're going to start by recapping 2 weeks of Weekly Tittles, if people have reports on both of them. The tittle from 2 weeks ago was called Mi Casa es Su Casa. The assignment was to do something to make your home more ready for entertaining, if you're so inclined. And then the tittle from last week was called One Thing. The assignment was to try to get unstuck by doing one action of any size toward an organizing task on which you procrastinated or had trouble getting started. Let's hear from our participants in Zoom and on Facebook. Who worked on either of these tittles this week or last week? Please let us know in the comments. YouTube viewer Honeybee shared a comment on the topic of entertaining. Honeybee writes, "My ex-sister-in-law was once invited to a party I was having with friends. In front of my friends, she started pointing out flaws, like some paint on the ceiling from when we had recently painted. I handed her a notepad and a pen and asked her to write down all the problems she found, and I told her she'd be invited back once I'd gotten around to fixing them all. That shut her up. I don't think I ever invited her to anything after that either."
Okay, so it still makes me laugh. It made me laugh when I read it the first time. It's still making me laugh now. I can, in my mind's eye, I can just see her handing the notepad to the sister-in-law. Oh my God, it was such a great idea to ask her to write down the list of all the problems that she found. It's one thing to notice some flaws, but it's quite another thing entirely to start pointing them out as party conversation to everybody in the room.
Yeah.
As family, she probably thought she had the right to notice them and to tell you and your husband, but she forgot to deliver that info privately.
Yeah.
And right, like,
If you're gonna party shame, if you're gonna publicly shame someone, then getting shamed right back is seems appropriate.
like you've earned it,
Yeah.
right? She really should have delivered it privately. And frankly, even if she had delivered it privately, it would have sounded critical of the work instead of supportive of the work. Maybe in her mind, she was creating a punch list for the workmen to so they could come and complete and clean up or fix their job. But I'm really giving her the benefit of the doubt for seeing and telling you the flaws she noticed because she was family. However, delivering those comments as part of the party is really the breach for me, and I was not the time or place to share her ideas. So, love that you took care of yourself around it and handed her a notepad and said, "Write them down, and I'll let you know when we're fixed." And I'm sure that she shut up because she realized what she was doing, or she at least realized that her sister-in-law was uncomfortable with what she was doing. And so I appreciate that you took care of yourself and you had every right. And giving her the benefit of the doubt, there may have been a reason why she needed to participate in the discussion about what was wrong, but she didn't need to do it at the party. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that one because the story description just made me laugh out loud.
Anita's got her hand up. Anita, do you have a tittle report for us?
What's going on, Miss Anita?
Yeah, I've been having some crazy times here, but what I finally did, and I only have just been thinking about doing it. I finally got the stuff for the taxes together. I only need I need to go through 2 more long summaries of accounts where I have donations and expenses that are deductible. And I made an appointment to see my tax accountant.
Ooh.
So
Excellent.
now I have to, I must finish it.
You've
But
created a deadline, right? Like you
Yeah.
created a deadline, and that is very
Also,
motivating.
I also figured out another thing that'll cut back on this next year. For the most part, I do Charity Navigator. I donate online, so I have those summaries. But periodically, they will send me a request, and I have something I have to make out a check for. And what I've done now, since I really usually can't read my carbons, and I don't record any checks, I just use the carbons, and I trust the bank to figure out the math. I have a little envelope for deductions, and I just tear out that, the check copy. As soon as I write it, go over anything that doesn't show too well and stick it in that envelope. So, because my bank does, I don't like the way they give you your, expense for the year or whatever.
Yeah.
You have to go in, you have to click on a check. It's not like in the old days where you could get your checks and go, do,
Right.
Right.
Now
you can look at the
get
physical
nothing.
checks.
Get an image. You got to look at each individual image to tell whether it's a deductible expense.
Yeah.
So I took that step out, which is good.
I'm proud of you for setting the appointment and creating an artificial deadline, because now we're talking about last week's tittle, which was make a movement on a task that you've been procrastinating about. So you set a deadline, which creates artificial pressure for you to keep going. And you pulled out some stuff and you identified a shortcoming that you're dealing with this year that you can fix next year by pulling those carbons and putting them in an envelope right away. So you did a whole bunch of things towards that front. So good for you. And by the time you get ready to go to the appointment, you'll be in good shape. And I will ask this question when you go to see the accountant. You are collecting things for contributions, and you're probably collecting other information for other deductions. But the question you should ask yourself is, have those donations or the other things you're collecting for specific deductions met the threshold where you actually can deduct them? Because if they don't meet the threshold and he's just filing you with a standard deduction, then you may be doing a bunch of paperwork for no good reason. So and then they're not using it. So you need to ask him, are you actually deducting these charitable donations, or am I not meeting the threshold? Are you using the standard deduction? And therefore, I'm doing prep work for you that isn't necessary. If you're donating a huge amount of money as a percentage of your income, you may meet the threshold for specifically deducting those, but you need to find out whether he's actually using the data that you're creating, or if he declares, he figures out based on the dollar amount that it doesn't qualify.
Yeah.
And so find that out. And, if you can adjust, if most people give generally the same amount every year. And so if you know that generally is true and doesn't meet the threshold, then you can stop twitching about it and just give your money for the fun of it and don't worry about the tax records.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Rowan reports, I decluttered, and in parentheses, she says canceled some Amazon orders.
Oh,
very good.
That's excellent.
Stop the clutter before it even leaves its
stop the auto delivery.
Leaves the source, right?
Right.
Naomi says, I did the real bare minimum, found where the photos are that have been waiting for a decade to be sorted and annotated.
Hey,
that's a start.
That's a start. You can't work with it until you have it in front of you. So if you found it, you're in good shape. And a lot of times people they're wandering around thinking I need to work on the photos, but they don't know where they are. And so if you went to the step to actually find them, step one. And that means you can pull them out and put them somewhere and move them forward in your priority listing of things to think about and deal with.
Well, and she added, only did it because my sister asked for one of the photos from our parents' youth to show to our great nephews.
Hey, whatever works,
it takes,
man.
right?
Right. Whatever made it happen. That's awesome. Good job.
Paula reports, I took a flag intended for but never used for a family member's funeral to the local VFW post. They were thrilled to get it. Also went through boxes and threw out enough stuff to toss 2 boxes.
Hey, 2 boxes emptied. That's awesome. Good job.
Pat says, in a clutter hotspot challenge last week, I finally cleared off my kitchen table and 2 big kitchen counters. I only have 1 small counter to go.
Wow, that is a good one because I'm guessing that that is a really active zone for you and that it's always has always accumulated stuff. So good job. Think of it as lava now. What goes on the counter has to be very intentionally designed to be there.
Right. It has to belong there, or it has to go away when reset time comes around.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good
Catherine said
job.
Catherine says, I did the one thing to get started again on decluttering. I got my medical receipts for 2025 together.
Oh, that's a good one. And that's another deduction that you have to make sure that you meet a threshold before it's actually deductible. And so you want to check with your tax accountant and find out, am I actually spending enough money out of pocket? Because it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and for medical, it's a huge figure too.
Yeah, it's a big
Yeah.
percentage. So if a bunch of your medical stuff is being covered by insurance or Medicare so that you're not out of pocket, then it doesn't matter. And what matters is the cash that you've paid and whether that cash out for medical expenses is greater than the deductible threshold for your income.
Yeah.
And so pay attention to that. Glad you got it done though. That's a good, you can't even have that conversation with the accountant until you can tell them what the number is. So you did a good job.
Jane says, I went through my paper time will tell bin, starting at the bottom. It's much easier for me to let questionable papers go when they have the chance to age, and I
Right?
start with the oldest.
When they've marinated down there at the bottom of the pile. Exactly. I mean, if you think of it as the strata of here's all the rocks and down below is, 50 million years and above is 10 million years. You have the equivalent layering that's happening in your pile of paper. So go to the bottom. Surprisingly, that event has now gone by. That interest is now faded. It's a lot easier to let go of well marinated aged paper. It's much easier to get through it.
It's funny how much time we're spending talking about paper even before we've gotten to the main topic. One more tittle report, because I want to share this one because it's on the entertaining topic.
Okay.
CJ says, we're actually having house guests this weekend, so I started walking through our place with fresh eyes along the visitor's path from the garage and yard, inward with a trash bag, recycling bin, and donation box. Made some noticeable progress.
Hey, that's cool. And it's great when you have that artificial third party incentive, right? Somebody's coming. And so you can walk through as if you're them and see it differently and grab and go. And anything that you pull out is one less thing that they're going to see. So good for you. Don't twitch about it. Don't make yourself crazy. You probably can't fix everything, but you can make a lot of progress and you can make a big improvement. And whether they recognize or understand that it's a big improvement doesn't matter. It'll just make you feel more comfortable about them being there. And so you need to know that you've made a big dent and they're not seeing everything that they would have seen if you'd done nothing. So good job. That's a good one.
Okay, I misspoke. One more because it's really on theme.
Okay.
M says, I did a paper task so horrible that it had bothered me for weeks. It was
Ooh,
so easy that I don't even remember what the paper was about now. So I think that's a great place to that's a
that's a good
great
segue,
comment
right?
to get us to our main topic, which is paper, and to start by reminding everybody that, there most of the worst paper you have to deal with is only so bad because you have made it that way with
Because
your
of the fear and
with your
loathing.
fear and your anxiety and that sense of dread.
And the irritation that you have to do it at all.
All right, it's time once again to parse the particular problems that paper poses. Sorry, I just cannot resist
The
the
alliteration.
alliteration when it's P. Today, we're going to examine the habits and beliefs that lead to heaps, folders, boxes, bags, bins, and drawers full of bills, receipts, records, recipes, clippings, statements, magazines, and so much more. We'll discuss the reasons we keep more paper than we need and offer pointers for purging your personal paper piles.
So our survey responses this week show a lot of paper issues among the audience. Fully 30% said they have a massive backlog of paper or paper covers their house like snow, which I kind of like that visual. I've seen that client where paper's on every available surface everywhere. Another 27% said they have a backlog that's starting to become a problem. And the remaining 43% said their papers are sorted and filed, or they have a small manageable amount of paper that's still to be sorted. But the stories about why they have a ton of paperwork are the more fascinating detail from the survey. And there's some recurring themes, of course, from everybody's answers. One of them is, what if I need it? I can't decide, or I'm afraid to decide. It's a boring chore that I don't have time to spend on. I hate filing, or filing makes it disappear. Paper is my history and my keepsakes. I want to scan it, but scanning is boring and time consuming. I want to shred it, but shredding is boring and time consuming. Those are sort of some general themes that I pulled out of the survey answers that happened more than once. And these answers point out an interesting truth about dealing with paperwork. It's not fun to do it. You're not likely to find a fun time to work on it. It takes a good deal of time to do it. And when you have a backlog, you can't usually fix it in a day. You're in for a many, many hours project. If it's left behind, if all that paper is just left there, it's going to be a huge burden for your heirs to do that work after you're gone. And if it stays an unorganized mess, you won't be able to find what you want when you need it. And so the fact that you saved it sort of becomes irrelevant because you can't put your hands on it anyway. The fact that you know it's in the house somewhere doesn't really help you. So when you need that piece of paper, you need to be able to go get it.
That's a really big one. And I think we have a comment that we're going to talk about later on where someone mentioned that their husband wants to hold on to absolutely everything. And I think to, our listeners and viewers who feel like I just have to keep everything. I have to keep everything just in case when it comes to paper. The best way to start confronting that attitude is to think about, how would you find the thing you need? Is it even possible? Is there any chance that you can find one needle in that enormous haystack when you need it? And so to break that idea, to start breaking down that idea that you have to keep everything, I think it's really important to remember that.
Yeah, to face the truth.
You're not going to be able to find it.
You can't find it. You don't know where it is, or you think you know where it is, and then you go to look for it and it's not actually there. And you are hoping that you know where it is, but the truth is you probably don't. And now some people swear to me that they know exactly where in a pile of paper something is. It's like, okay, if you remember putting that piece of paper there 5 years ago or 2 years ago or last week, great. And can you guarantee that that pile hasn't moved since then, that you haven't shuffled it around, that you haven't inverted the pile, that you haven't knocked the pile over and put it back? Are you certain that it hasn't been disturbed from your memory of where it is? And so I think it's true. Part of the time you probably can put your hands on it then. But part of the time your certain belief that you know where it is really not true. And you're just, you don't ever have to challenge that belief because you don't go looking for the piece of paper to prove that you don't know where it is. So it's important to keep in mind that the fact that it's in the house does not mean that you can actually find
retrievable in any reasonable amount of time.
Exactly. All right. So those are that list that I just made about if it's left behind, it's a burden. If it stays in an unorganized mess, you can't find it. Those are basic facts about your paper projects. The goal of any paper project is to get the paper down to a manageable set where you can find what you need, you can keep track of vital legal documents, and you can be able to file your taxes easier. So the question number 2 that we asked in the survey tells me how you're dealing with paper in maintenance mode. And 35% of you said, I sort and manage each day's incoming mail and other papers as they arrive in my home, which is awesome. 27% said that you manage those papers, the incoming papers, weekly. 19% say that you manage them occasionally. 14% said you let it pile up and then you deal with it in one Herculean effort. So I'm guessing that's at tax time, a few times during the year, randomly, when you feel, oh my God, I can't find that piece of paper and I've got to have it before we
When
leave town.
when you suddenly need to renew your passport.
Right, and you can't
Yeah.
find the passport, yeah, whatever trigger that is. And then 5% of you actually admitted to, I tend to let the mail and other papers pile up indefinitely. So that's 38% of the audience, that likely has a substantial backlog based on their limited frequency of paper handling. 27% that handle the paper weekly, they're probably not adding much to the backlog, although it's possible they may not be handling all of the paperwork. So the backlog may be growing at a much slower rate than the people that are ignoring paper more. The 35% that are working on paper daily are setting an example for the rest of us. Woohoo. And those of you that are handling it daily or weekly are actually working one of the two projects that exist. The backlog paper project is one, and the project of maintaining the daily incoming paper is the second project. And we forget that those two projects are really separate with two different processes that are needed to handle them. If you're working new paper regularly, you're working on the maintenance project, and dealing with the backlog project requires a different timeline and a different process. You might be feeling overwhelmed by paper, partially because you're still merging all the paper into one project. So separate the paper into two distinct projects, and tackling either one will be easier. Question 3 asked, describe the types or categories of paper clutter that you find the most challenging to sort, purge, and organize. And this gives us the categories of paper that people are struggling with they're struggling to handle, or they're struggling to make decisions.
Okay. Anne and many others said sentimental items.
So much of the sentimental items is paper, right? Like photos, greeting cards, handwritten letters, handwritten notes, but also event tickets when you go to the concert or the movie, newspaper articles where you got mentioned professionally, or your kids show up in some kind of school newspaper for something they did. Travel documents when the family goes on a trip and you have all these. It used to be that you would end up with a bunch of itinerary paperwork when somebody scheduled a big family vacation and they pre-booked everything, and you end up with a big itinerary. And then you go places and you take all the little brochures with you. Every museum that you go to, or every tourist spot has some kind of paperwork and brochure that you grab and take out with you. And those become part of your sentimental items. And they range from very personalized, like a greeting card, to they're only attached to you via your memory of the trip, for example. So you have a brochure of the hotel you stayed in, or you have a brochure of the museum you went to, but it's not personalized to you. It's just a trigger that you went to that place. That paper is sentimental items is a big pile. Let's just say for sure.
Well, and I think I put this one first on the list in
Mm,
the responses because I think it's one of the categories of paper where I think the idea we've talked about several times before of bigger buckets comes into play. And it's
mm,
also, I think, one of the areas where you can save a lot of work for yourself by segregating that stuff from everything else at the
yes,
earliest possible moment. So
absolutely.
make yourself if you don't already have it, make a folder or a box or a bin, whatever
Yeah,
capacity you're
folder's not
going
going to be big
to
enough,
need that holds, well, it would be for me.
right?
It would be for me
But you
because
feel different about sentimental
right.
paperwork.
And but yeah, whatever is an appropriate size for you, maybe expanding folder to start with,
Mm,
and make sure that you're culling that stuff right at the start. Take the the greeting cards you receive, the personal letters, and so on, everything we've just talked about. As new stuff comes in, get it out of the rest of the
the
system
fray, yeah,
straight into sentimental. One advantage to that is you're hardly ever going to have to deal with the sentimental stuff in any big hurry.
exactly. There's
So
no pressing timeline.
if it's out of the way when you have to look at the rest of your paper to pull together vital financial information for taxes or whatever, having the sentimental pulled out is going to save you some time.
Right. And it also, I mean, the thing about all the other paper that isn't a keepsake, there's a whole bunch of a decision tree of process to put the paper through about whether you need to keep it or not. But once it becomes a keepsake, then you're just keeping it for the memory. That's the only reason you're declaring it, that it needs to live with you indefinitely. You've taken the timeline off of it, so there's no pressure to subtract it anymore if you've declared it a keepsake. And so isolating that stuff, you don't get into it all the time and look at it. And so it doesn't need to be in a file cabinet somewhere mixed in with your regular paperwork. It doesn't need to be part of your historical financial records. It needs to all be separated away, because those photographs you're going to go through once in a blue moon. Those keepsakes you're going to look at once in a blue moon, and it's not going to be something that you have to touch all the time. So like it said, subtracting it, getting it in a keepsakes box, and separating it 100% from the rest will make your active pile of paper that you have to make decisions about be much, much smaller. Because right now, if they're still all scrambled together, your pile of paper looks much bigger than it probably is, because one of the decisions is it a keepsake? Yes. That you want to keep? Yes. Then it goes in a keepsake box and you're done. That's the end of the processing. So until you want to start filtering and making the keepsake pile more manageable. So like you said, separating it out, pulling the photographs out, pulling the all of the other categories that we made of paper that is sentimental only, and pulling that out of the fray just reduces the volume that you have to do your other decision making about.
Okay, Yvonne says she struggles with important documents like insurance and taxes. I never know what I should keep and what is truly unimportant. I get I get sent correspondence, but a lot of it feels redundant.
Insurance always feels important, but a lot of the paper isn't as important as you think. So expired policies are an instant fire starter for you. You can just go put them in a fireplace somewhere and burn them up. Once the policy is expired, it means nothing anymore. And an explanation about what, the current policy that's still in force. There's a start and an end date of of any kind of insurance policy: health insurance, liability insurance,
Auto.
home insurance, auto insurance. They all have expiration dates. So once the expiration date goes by, that policy is dead dog.
Unless
After,
unless you have a claim that's
yeah,
going to
unless you're in the middle
pay
of processing a
under
claim,
under that policy, right?
right.
But
But most of us,
if you've just when you receive your new auto renewal policy every 6 months, if you had no issues, no car insurance claims in that 6 months, the old policy can go right away because it has
right.
no future relevance.
Well, and usually there's a little overlap. You get the new policy before the old one's expired.
Right.
So you can put the new one in and then go back when the old one expires and pull the old one out. But the truth is, all of those insurance policies in your life, anything with the word insurance attached to it, except some life insurance, is going to have constant churning. Here's the new policy, get rid of the old policy churning
Right.
that needs to happen. And so just knowing that about insurance. The other thing is that you probably get explanation of benefits every month, where they're sending statements. Medicare sends them, the insurance companies, health insurance company sends them to say, this is how we handled your insurance claim, the claims against your insurance policy. So they write you a document that says, these 7 doctors submitted claims. This is the date of service. This is how much. This is what we approved. This is what we paid. And they're basically reporting to you how they're handling your insurance business. And if you agree based on the document that they handled those claims correctly, and they paid the doctors that you expected to be paid, and that it is nothing's weird about it, then you're good and you don't need that statement anymore. It's your opportunity to discover, oh, we submitted this claim, the doctor submitted this claim, and they refused to pay it. The insurance company didn't pay something, and they have a little bubble that says, and here's reference number A, and you go look at A, and A says, you haven't met your deductible yet. We applied it to the deductible. Or, this charge is excessive for this market and we won't pay that much money on that. There's a million reasons why they deny paying claims, but they will tell you somebody submitted this, we rejected it, and here's our reason. And so if you disagree with that reason or you think it's a problem, you can follow up with your doctor. And I will tell you that the doctor wants to get paid and there's an insurance person at their office that is trying to get that claim paid. So that by the time you figure out that something wasn't paid, they will have already tried to cure it. They will have already gone back and tried to mess with it and resubmit it in a way that might get it paid. And so usually you don't have to worry about it too hard. So if you review it and you agree that the statement's okay, they paid everything, it's not a big deal, then you can shred that document after you look at it. If you review it and you think it's showing that there's a problem, I took this test and they refused to cover the lab costs. Why is that? Then, maybe you've triggered yourself a phone call to call the insurance company and find out what's going on. But otherwise, unless you think there's a problem, if it all looks good, you can say, okay, it all looks good and everybody got paid, and shred-a-rama. It's time to go. Taxes is a large category of paper. So she said insurance is taxes make her uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But taxes as a collection of paper is a few things, but you need to keep what supports any number that got written on the tax return. This is my revenue. These are my deductions. And the paper that supports those numbers that are the source for the numbers that went on the return, that's the stuff that you need to keep until the audit period's up. Plus bank statements and investment statements that show your financial transactions. What's good about it is if you have the paper now and it's going to be basically a third party justification of your financial transactions. So it supports you in case you get audited. And if you do get audited, you don't have to go to your bank 4 years from now and request old bank statements for the IRS to look at. So if you have them and you can print them out now while they're relatively current and store them with the tax stuff, then you have support what's on your return plus bank statements and investment statements to support, hey, I'm not hiding financial transactions. Here's my bank account. Here's my investment account. This shows money that's going in and out so they can look at it. And then you're covered from that standpoint. Paper that doesn't support a number that's on the return doesn't become part of the tax file. So if it isn't part of the tax file, then we have a whole nother set of conversations about why we're keeping or not keeping the piece of paper. Learning what those filters are in terms of taxes is a good first step to getting comfortable.
Summer says she struggles with items that need more follow-up.
So that's not really a paper problem. That is a to-do list problem. So once you identify paper that needs more follow-up, then you've created a to-do item. And now it's not about filing it away or tossing it. You need to put it on your to-do list instead and collect that paper separately from everything else. It's once you've declared, like, here's an EOB and there's a problem and you want to make a phone call to the insurance company or to the doctor, then now it's not a paper that needs to be filed or shredded. It's a paper that is supporting the question you want to ask the doctor. And so it becomes part of a to-do system. So the question is, how are you tracking your to-dos? And do you have a folder of paperwork that supports the to-do items you're doing? So you have a list of things you need to do. And sometimes those to-do items have paper to back them up. Oh, and somebody's saying Todoist for to-dos. That's an app on the phone.
Yeah.
Now, if you do it on the phone, if you do that listing digitally, you still probably want to keep the papers that are the reference that you're going to have in your hand when you make the phone call. And so having a folder of some kind, a capture mechanism of some kind for the paper that supports those items is where the stuff needs to go when you need to follow up.
Audience member C, the letter C, mentions 3 categories. One, information that is or might be useful. 2, mementos of all kinds. We've covered that. 3, lists, notes, to-dos, references.
So the whole idea of general information, this is something that I find really fascinating. You're saving interesting info when you don't have any immediate need for it. And it means that you really want to create a privately curated database of random facts. If you want to be able to use that info, you need to capture it somehow and organize it so it can be found again. Making piles of interesting or useful information is the shortest and least useful way to go. Once you make a pile of unrelated stuff, finding any one item out of that pile becomes a game of hide and seek, and mostly you can't find anything. So you're keeping interesting info, but then you have to create a system that you can reference it again. You also mentioned lists and notes and references, and that depends on what stage they're in. The list of things to do that are complete can go. Notes where you're learning something it's part of how you absorb info while learning. I know that people they listen to lectures or they read books or they listen to a podcast and they take notes while they listen. It's part of how you process and absorb, how you help that information right into your brain is by writing kinetically with your hand. And so you're going through a process. The note taking is a learning support, but unless you expect to study those notes again for some reason, like you're going to go back and read them, the notes can really, once you've finished writing them and you're out of the podcast, the notes aren't necessary anymore. They did the work of you're writing it down to help cement it in your head. But how likely are you to go back and read those notes again? I know people that take notes all the time, but they never actually go back and read them.
Right.
So what's the point in keeping them?
And people who have saved the handouts from every single presentation that they've ever attended.
Right? And never
And
go back.
and this is where Samudra made a great comment that I think is really relevant here. When I hear information that is or might be useful, information that might be useful. Well, that's, they have libraries full of that,
Right?
and they've got an internet full of that. And so
Right?
Samudra says, I started asking myself, under what circumstance would I need this? Followed by, how likely is that circumstance to occur?
Right?
And
Which allows you to filter the information quickly.
those are great filters.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think you can add to that, how hard would it be for me to find it again if I wanted it?
Right. There may be information that you feel like is something you want at your fingertips, but at your fingertips does not mean laying around randomly around the house on a surface. That is not a functional storage of that data. So if you want to create a notebook and put some sleep protectors in, and when you find something interesting that you want to keep, you go put it in the notebook. How to get stains out of laundry. Sometimes I'll see lists like that around people's houses. Okay. So, create a notebook of ideas, processes, thoughts that you find fascinating and capture them. But if the notebook gets super full and you haven't put any time in organizing the information by some kind of category so that you can find it again, you're going to have to flip through every sheet protector in your binder until you find it.
And now what you've got is a paper stack with covers.
With covers, right. Now, it is not floating around the house, which is great. And it's not randomly on a surface, which is great. All of your miscellaneous, random, unrelated information that you want to save is in one place. So that at least narrows down where you have to look for it. But it's just like book people trying to keep all the books that they've read because they might want to pull it out again, except that they don't often do that. And so I get that we read information and find it interesting, and that can be the entertainment and the learning of it, the process of reading it and finding it interesting. That's the fun for you. But then that doesn't mean you need to capture and keep the paper of that information for later, because you're going to keep reading and learning things and finding other things interesting. That list is you're just constantly going to be finding things interesting, and the list is going to be really big. And so learning to accept that I find that data interesting and I don't have to capture it. I can just have the experience of finding that interesting and enjoy it
Yeah.
in the moment and then walk away without capturing the information for later. There'll be a few things that you think you have to keep. That's fine. But do you need to capture and catalog every piece of paper that you find has information on it that you find interesting? No. And if you are easily entertained and easily fascinated with written material, with information of all kinds, yeah, you need to think hard about how badly you want to capture and catalog all the stuff that you find interesting, because the more you find interesting, the bigger the cataloging project is for you.
Yeah.
So just acknowledge that.
Okay. Allison said, I'm currently being inundated by paper from a group I hold a leadership position in. I have a good filing system that works well, but wish the blizzard of paper would stop. I do better with physical paper than electronic documents, so switching to digital form is not a practical solution.
So if you're on a committee or a board of some kind and you're in a leadership position, you're being sent paper from all the players whom you lead. So you know what they're doing. So treat those papers like the backup that they are. Make sure those people are saving their originals, review their docs, save what shows pertinent details, and filter the rest out. People always overshare with their leadership. They're trying to cover their,
Patootie.
they're
Hmm.
trying to cover their patootie, and they're trying to make sure that you know what they're doing. And so they are going to overshare, first of all, and inundate you with paper, which you're already experiencing. So review what you're receiving and analyze what kinds of paper is coming your way repeatedly. And you may need places to capture the various types of paper. So set up a capture vehicle, preload it with sheet protectors so you can receive paper, review it, and capture what you feel like you need to have access to a second time. As a leader, there's some information that you probably want to be able to circle back to and pull back out again. And so you can filter what you're getting as A, your direct reports are oversharing, B, they are going to continue to overshare, and C, there's a repeatable, noticeable repeating of types of information that's coming your way. This committee is sending you a report. This person is writing you an email about what they did this week, whatever it looks like. And you can think about each of those types of paper and decide how valuable is this for me to track myself versus let the original stay with them and I can just read and delete.
Right.
I can just read and toss.
Yeah, like minutes of meetings are a really good example of something that you can read it once, make any notes if you see anything you want to dispute. If there's nothing you want to dispute, let it go. If you agree that the minutes of the last meeting are accurate, then toss it, because the recording secretary of the committee or board is already going to
Who's
have it
keeping
if you
that
ever
stuff?
need to see it again.
Mm-hmm.
Don't burden yourself with it.
Right?
Okay, let's see. We're gonna go over a few minutes since we started so late, if that's
Yeah.
okay with
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah.
Um, Noreen says articles from magazines and email newsletters. I save them in a
Mm.
folder and try to read and purge them regularly. Otherwise, they become useless because they're out of date/expired.
Media articles of any kind are really a moving target. They become out of date really quickly and they get rewritten the same time next year.
Right?
So pay attention to how quickly you read what's in your to read file. Can you really keep up? If you can't, it's probably time to cancel some of those magazines or accept that some of those newsletters that you get aren't really worth your reading time. While this is another form of information consuming, it's fascinating. You think the article seems interesting, you pull it out, and I'm going to read that later. And so you're going through the process of selecting reading material and probably capturing more than you have time to read. And so when you go to filter, I think you have to say, yeah, that's been in there long enough and I don't have time to read it. I'm 2 inches deep into more current material and I got to let this one go.
Yeah,
Pay attention to how much you tear off versus how much you have time to read.
I used to be afflicted with that particular issue of saving so much stuff, saving so much reading material. And I guess it was really probably when you and I decluttered my house that I was ready to sell, that the switch flipped in my head and I said, you know what? I'm never going to run out of reading material. I'm absolutely never going to run out of reading material. And it's kind of, you know, this reading material is something that's super relevant to me right now. But like, think of some things that were super relevant to you a year ago or 2 years ago that you never give a minute's thought to now.
Mm-hmm.
So collecting all this incoming reading material on the assumption that it's still going to be interesting to you by the time you burrow through through the thousands of pages of it that you've saved, it's, maybe a little unrealistic,
Right.
right?
And it's true that there's some season to some of the articles. We get to the beginning of the year and everybody writes get organizing articles. And then we get to the spring and everybody writes gardening articles. And then we get to like there's a season to the random magazine articles that happen, random newspaper articles, random online stuff that is repeated. And so it may be a new take on it or it may be a new author, but this is not the only time you're ever going to get gardening tips
Yeah,
in your lifetime.
yeah,
They're going to come back around. So it's you're not going if you surrender that article, you're not going to not ever see that information again some other way.
yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, let's move on to question 4 so we can tackle at least a couple of people's responses. For this one, we ask survey respondents to complete one or more of the following statements. I struggle with paper clutter because blank. I would have an easier time managing paper if only blank. Or the accumulation of paper in my home makes me feel blank.
Mm.
So Selena says, I would have an easier time managing paper if only I had a separate piece of furniture or a set of folders to organize it.
So you're thinking you need a file cabinet to store paper. It's easier to create the set of folders and to store them in a file box. You don't actually have to have a piece of furniture to make this happen. And if the issue is that you're not sure what folders to create, if because you said I need a set of folders to organize it, if you're not sure what folders to create, then you're in luck because there are several filing systems out there for sale. You can buy a set of folders designed to store household paperwork, and you just have to do a little Google searching around that. There are people that make and sell sets of here's my system for household files, and you can buy them and they come with labels and you just have to set up the system and start filling it with your paper, so you don't even have to think hard about it. It can be done. So don't stress about you need to figure out how to create it from scratch, because this ain't the first rodeo for anybody thinking about paper storage and how to manage household files. And you can find somebody that did the work for you already and create a system and buy it.
I would also point Selena or anyone else who is lacking a system to listen to a couple of our previous webcasts, and I'm going to include links to a couple of them in the show notes,
Mm-hmm.
where we've talked at greater length about the idea of bigger buckets.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to kind of summarize that really quickly?
Concept of
The
bigger
concept of
buckets.
bigger buckets?
Yes, because I think that we tend to make the basic filing system that everybody learns to make is take a document, put it in a file folder, label it with a name, and then file it alphabetically. And then everything gets spread out and you
It's
fill a file cabinet full of paper
etc. ad infinitum.
ad infinitum, and they're never related, and then you have to remember what you named in order to retrieve the thing you're looking for. You have to remember what you named the file folder when you put it in there. And so an alphabetical filing system for each with a file for each particular piece of paper doesn't really give you a retrievable system that's very functional. So we suggest that you do it in bigger buckets instead, which is instead of having a file folder for all the things, for each of the things related to the car, you would have a larger file folder, a big bucket that's called car, auto. And in that is, here's the documents where you purchased the car. Here's the folder that has the current insurance for the car. Here's the folder that has all the repairs for the car. Here's the folder for the purchases related to the car. Like I bought tires, I bought, you know, new floor mats.
Yeah,
I
here's
what
the
fill in the
oil
back,
change
right?
receipt. Yeah.
Right. All that stuff can be in a bucket that's labeled car. So you don't have to, you can have a few file folders in the car bucket
Or not.
or not,
Yeah, or
right?
just
Like,
lump it all
so if
together.
you have to suddenly find something related to the car, you can pull out that big bucket that is all the car stuff and flip through that stack of isolated, segregated paper and find what you need. But it allows you to go, oh, this is related to the car, and you stick it in the car bucket, and it makes the decision making faster for you. And then if you want to go into the car bucket and refine the storage there with some other categories, you can, but you don't have to. Cars one, house is one, medical is one. And so there's some larger buckets to be had. Keepsakes would be one if you wanted to have them in that filing system
Yeah.
that you can aim for that makes the decision making process faster.
I think to boil it down to the essential concept, it's set up a system that is as simple as you can possibly make it. Because the simpler it is, the easier, the better your compliance is going to be. The easier it's going to be to make those decisions as you're talking about.
Right.
Make your system as simple as you can get away with.
And I will add,
You can always dig in and subdivide more later if you find that you've
yeah,
made
if
it
you
too
need to,
simple.
right?
But if you make it too complex, you can end up with
It's
hundreds or
hard to
thousands of
unwind it.
things lost in an incredibly complicated, intricate system
That you're less likely to comply with because it's too
because it's
complicated,
too hard.
right?
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Compliance is just too difficult.
One of the buckets in the bigger bucket system needs to be miscellaneous because there are going to be some broad categories. This is related to my family. This is the car. This is the house. This, fill in the blank. This is my work. And then you're going to have some random, 10% of random unrelated to the other big buckets and just call that miscellaneous. And when miscellaneous gets too fat, you can go and sort miscellaneous and figure out what's in there. And you may find another category is in there that you didn't think of the first round. But every bigger bucket filing system has to have a miscellaneous bucket.
Yeah. Okay, let's take one more and then we probably need to move on to our closing stuff. Let's see. Debbie says, Debbie answered all three. She says, I struggle with paper clutter because I procrastinate. 2, I would have an easier time managing paper if only I had a better system in place and made myself do it. 3, the accumulation of paper in my home makes me feel out of control.
And you procrastinate because you feel out of control. Sure, it'd be easier if you had a system and you used it, but that's not where you are right now. You're feeling out of control, and that makes everything freeze. So concentrate instead on getting in motion, and you can work out the systems later. But you can do the first steps to get in motion just going through and making keep toss decisions. I'm going to keep it for whatever reason, I'm going to throw it out. And that helps your accumulation get smaller and it helps you feel like you have better control because you're in motion and you're reducing the population of paper. And it will give you some more confidence so that you can not procrastinate, not feel out of control, and feel like you can create a system later. But there's a whole lot you can do before you create a system. If the initial system is I'm keeping it, I'm not keeping it, and you go get rid of a bunch of paper right now first.
Yeah.
That's a great place. That's the most basic decision you have to make. And you can go back with the keep box and create a system out of that later. But in the meantime, you can go through and start thinning the herd.
Yeah,
And hopefully that'll let you get past procrastination.
and by removing by removing a bunch of stuff that's ready to go, you're going to feel more in control and you're going to feel less of the emotional phenomena that drive you, that feed your procrastination.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, it's time to talk about next week. We are going to be back next week for the long promised episode about Goodbye Things, the new Japanese minimalism by Fumio Sasaki. We're going to have a survey on that. And if you haven't read the book, you're running out of time. I'll have another link in the show notes today.
It's a short book, you guys. You can
It
read
is a
it.
short book. It's only about maybe 200 pages, something like
Mhm.
that, and very accessible too. It's an easy read, I think. I
Yeah,
found
yeah.
it really went fast. So we're going to be back to talk about that, and we look forward to you joining us. Gail, why don't you give us the tittle?
Okay, this week's tittle is Plan a Paper Project. This week's assignment is to apply principles we've talked about in this week's show to plan a project to address your worst paper challenge. Reflect on the category of paper that you've identified in this week's survey as your most challenging type, your paper nemesis. If you haven't taken the survey, answer this question. What type or category of paper clutter do you find the most challenging to sort, purge, and organize? Decide how much time you're willing to spend in a single session of paper processing. How many sessions a week of that duration do you think you might be able to take on? And if you're unsure of your capacity, start with two 10-minute sessions. Schedule specific appointments with yourself this week to work on your nemesis category of paper for the period to which you've committed to work, and then work those scheduled appointments. Set a timer to let you know when you've met your time objective. And at the end of each session, notice whether you still feel able to keep going or whether you're exhausted, whether you've burnt out all of your resources and your stamina's gone. Pay attention to that. Based on the answer, maybe you can make sessions a little longer, or maybe you need to make sessions a little shorter and repeat them more often.
I think
And then come back and tell us.
Gail. I think I may have accidentally I think I had another point that I was going to make there that seems to have not made it into the script, which was then plan a longer term project based on what you've learned through this 1 week trial.
Okay.
I'll add that in the write up that goes in the show notes.
Okay. All right.
So,
The idea
um,
being you're experimenting with one type of paper and trying to work through it and make a plan and make a schedule and work on it. And then let that be your learning environment for the larger paper project as a whole.
yeah. All right.
Okay.
If you're watching this on YouTube, we would love for you to join us live. To get notifications about upcoming events, we invite you to join the meetup group by visiting cfhou.com/meetup. You can also follow us on Facebook by visiting cfhou.com/Facebook, or subscribe to our mailing list by visiting cfhou.com/subscribe. We love to hear from you, so please keep your questions, comments, and topic suggestions coming on Facebook, YouTube, or anywhere that you find us. You can always reach us through our website at clutterfairyhouston.com.
We are so glad that you're here every week. We look forward to having everybody come for the Clutter Fairy Book Club. We're going to have a Clutter Fairy Book Club next week and talk about Goodbye Things. I hope you'll be there. Have a good week, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.